This is not meant as a hostile move against Japan or Germany or anybody else. This is not about, this is about balancing and fairness in trade. So he wants to reset the baseline, and once that baseline is reset, then you can enter into bilateral negotiations with individual countries about changes that can be made to our trade, our bilateral trade. The Canadian government has made their position, how they feel about it, clear. The president has made his argument as to why he thinks Canada would be better off joining the United States for economic purposes.
But I'm asking you now, do you consider what the president has said about Canada becoming the 51st state? Is he serious?
You know, I'll tell you how that came about, okay? He's in a meeting with Trudeau, and Trudeau basically says that if the U.S. imposes tariffs on Canada, Canada couldn't survive as a nation state, at which point the president said, well, then you should become a state.
And understanding your point about this not being a reality show or personalities, Ukraine or anything else for that matter, your boss has, shall we say, a rather strong personality. And I'm wondering, in light of that and his repeated comments about Canada becoming, or should be, the 51st state, the whole tariff situation, which intensified as we were on our way here after the big announcement in Jeddah, did that complicate your discussions at all? Was it?
Never came up once. In our I mean, obviously, with the foreign minister of Canada, it has, but it was not a topic. It was not on our agenda. I told you that would not be discussed. Tariffs were. Yeah. So let me explain on the tariffs. This is important for everybody to understand. This keeps being characterized as a hostile move against our allies. These are global tariffs on steel, on aluminum, on autos, on semiconductors. Eventually, the president stated this, and then a global, in April, the intention to put tariffs, assuming that the study comes back and so forth. But what they've discussed is a global reciprocal tariff. Understand what that means. That means basically whatever some country charges us, that's what we're going to charge them. The goal the president has made very clear is he wants to reset the baseline of international trade, which he believes, and I agree, is unfair to the United States. This is not meant as a hostile move against Japan or Germany or anybody else. This is not about, this is about balancing and fairness in trade. So he wants to reset the baseline, and once that baseline is reset, then you can enter into bilateral negotiations with individual countries about changes that can be made to our trade, our bilateral trade, so that it's fair for both sides. That's his goal. In his first administration, the president did tariffs as well. What he was disturbed by, in hindsight, is the fact that they included a bunch of exemptions that basically made them meaningless. And so what he wants to get back to is basically fairness in trade. It's as simple as that. Okay. We want to charge other countries what they charge us. And then ultimately, once the baseline is reset, and then in addition to that, there are industries that are critical to the United States and to our domestic security and our future. And he's identified them: steel, aluminum, semiconductors, automobiles. These are things that we believe are in our interest to have a domestic capacity, and we have to protect these industries from what we feel is subsidization and unfair competition from abroad. This is not meant to be hostile towards anybody. It is meant to be friendly and supportive of our foreign policy, of our national interest as a country. Once the baseline of trade is reset in a way that's fair and equitable, then we can engage in the process of bilateral negotiations with individual countries, including our allies, to set up a more sustainable and fair long-term trade arrangement between our respective countries.
Do you understand why the Canadians are taking such umbrage at these comments coming from the president? Is that something?
The Canadian government has made their position, how they feel about it, clear. The president has made his argument as to why he thinks Canada would be better off joining the United States for economic purposes. There's a disagreement between the president's position and the position of the Canadian government. I don't think that's a mystery coming in, and it wasn't a topic of conversation because that's not what the summit was about.
Mr. Secretary, said that the tariff policy was not hostile. However, President Trump yesterday in his social media post said that the EU previously had been hostile and abusive towards the United States. How do you square that? And secondly, is he serious when he's talking about the 51st state being Canada?
Well, I've already answered the question about Canada.
Okay, and is he serious? Do you take him seriously?
We're not discussing that here today because that's not what the purpose of this meeting was about. As far as the question that you're asking me about hostility, you look at the EU. Okay, the EU has a GDP basically comparable to that of the United States. The composition of their economy is similar to ours. These are not developing countries. These are developed countries. And yet they have a significant trade surplus with the United States, even though our economies are pretty much the same. These are not low-wage countries. That's a problem. All the president is saying is we need to equalize treatment. Whatever they do to us, we need to do to them, in addition to pointing to certain sectors that we have to protect. Who can argue against the idea that if some country charges us X to export our products, we should charge them the same? I get it. If you're a country or the EU that's benefiting from the status quo, you feel it is hostile to change the status quo because it's to your benefit. The problem is the President of the United States is looking out for the United States, both in national security and in economic relations. We will reset the basis of our trade relationship, and then we can enter into negotiations for something that's enduring and fair to both sides. That's what the president seeks to do, and that's what it begins by resetting, at a reciprocal way, the amount of tariffs we charge one another in our trade relations.
I know that we're not speaking about Canada becoming the 51st state at this meeting, but I'm asking you now, do you consider what the president has said about Canada becoming the 51st state? Is he serious?
You know, I'll tell you how that came about, okay? He's in a meeting with Trudeau, and Trudeau basically says that if the U.S. imposes tariffs on Canada, Canada couldn't survive as a nation state, at which point the president said, well, then you should become a state. And that's where this began. That said, the president has made an argument for why. He says he loves Canada. He says he made an argument for why Canada would be better off joining the United States from an economic perspective and the like. He's made that argument repeatedly, and I think it stands for itself.
All right.